Okay, here's part one of the Fragger video tutorials. Just a really bog standard, simple game in the vein of Atari Tank or VCS Combat. Okay, there's going to be plenty of parts to this tutorial because I only have so many minutes before I run out of storage limits. Okay, so let's just run the template. Let's see what it does. Doesn't do much. Okay, so I've just done F5 to run it. It should say build succeeded in the bottom left hand corner, which it did, and then it'll run. And what you should find is you get a nice purple screen. Okay, quite a large screen, so we can get a decent level on display. Okay, so let's just briefly, I've just killed it now, close the window. Let's just look at where everything goes. Okay, now the starting point, if we open up the file, looking in Solution Explorer, the file General Logic is here. Okay, we've got this thing called game state, and at the start I default this to load up, and this just keeps track of what mode I'm in, whether I'm loading graphics for the game, whether I'm in title screen, or whether the game's running, etc. Okay, you have various states. This game loop runs continually, and everything comes off the back of game loop. Okay, if we look at gm.cs and scroll down to near the bottom where there's a routine called update, this is all that happens continually. We check for the input, which has got nothing in it at the minute, and we run game loop. So we just run these two subroutines. One thing you need to get familiar with is the shortcut. So if we right click over game loop, select go to definition, we'll go to that subroutine. Okay, so the first thing that happens, it detects that the game state is load up, and it runs this subroutine called start preloader. So if we right click on that and say go to definition, what this does is this loads all the graphics and all the audio for the game. Okay, it changes the game state to loading assets and you'll see later on that that's just a number to represent what state we're in. And it loads up something called graphics based textures, and if you look on this right hand side, if your content isn't open, where it says Fragger content, just open that and you'll see that there are two folders, audio and graphics. You can open those just by clicking on the little black triangle, and you'll see there's something called base textures, and you'll see there's two audio files, one called fire.wav and one called hit.wav. Okay, and this code in start preloader, that bit loads a graphic and that bit loads the two sound effects. Okay, and that starts it happening. Now if we go back to general logic, when we're in the game state loading assets, which we just set, we check to see if everything's been loaded. Okay, and we keep doing that. We keep checking, and when that is loaded, so load complete, so this thing is true, we then run this routine, copy textures. Now for this example you shouldn't need to add any more graphics, okay, but this is the process in my engine that we go through to load a graphic. Okay, so we ask it to be loaded, and then when it's finished loading we copy it to a texture, okay, that is our reference, and that's the code for that. Once we've done that, we run a subroutine called start title. So I just right clicked on start title and it went straight to that code for me, and all we do there is we change the game state to title. Okay, and if we right click on title there, go to definition, you'll see here the states, so we can add in extra ones there as we need them. So at the minute all we've got in this is loading assets and title, but we will add more. Okay, now to make it a little bit more interesting, in our title screen it'd be nice to actually display something. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a sprite. And now this is a graphic that we can manipulate. We can move it around, blow it up, make it shrink, disappear, etc, etc. Sprites move around, but for this we're just going to keep it static. Okay, so we're going to run a subroutine called title graphic. It doesn't exist, so Visual Studio immediately starts moaning, and if we move our mouse over the little red squiggle, it says does not exist in the current context. So yeah, it doesn't exist, but we're going to get Visual Studio to create. So we're going to say, I've just right clicked, so I'll say generate method stub, and it creates the subroutine for me. Okay, which I'm now going to delete that bit, and I'm going to put my content. Okay, so to define a sprite I need to create one and then set its position and say what graphic I want to use for it. So what you'll find is this code is pretty standard. So I say sprite s equals gm.engineManager.add sprite. Okay, so that creates a sprite for me. Right, I now need to define a frame for it. Now the frame is going to come from my texture. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on this and I'm going to say open with. Now for you lot, the first time you do this it probably won't have fireworks. Alright, so what you need to do is say add, click on the little ellipse button, go to Adobe, open the fireworks folder, scroll down and select fireworks.exe. Okay, and then what you can do is you can then select OK and it will load that graphic into fireworks. Whenever you're editing these graphics, these textures, you must do it from within Solution Explorer, or the system doesn't know that you've edited things. Now this is going to chug a while, so I'm just going to pause my video. Okay, unpausing. So that took a few minutes to load up. This is what the texture looks like in Fireworks. Now, it's basically just a graphic, and this graphic is 512 by 512 pixels, and I've got various bits in here. I've got a title graphic, and you can change all this stuff, and then I've got these squares that are going to represent the map. So I've got various squares for like the background, sand, walls, destructible walls, bouncy walls, and here I've got a tank. Now you can't see it very well, but if you change the canvas colour to black you'll see, oh, there's a tank and there's a bullet. Alright, so we're just going to look at that and then we're going to take graphics from this to create our sprites. Okay, now what we'll need to do, back to our sprite that we were creating in Visual Studio, we need to say s.frame. We're going to define a frame for this sprite. Now where we're getting the graphic from, it's been loaded into our assets.txbase. Okay, that's where we copied the graphic to. So we have to tell the sprite engine that that is the texture that contains our graphic. Then we need to say where is the rectangle where the graphic resides. Okay, so I'm just going to type that for a second. Let's go back to Fireworks. Now if we were to just put the texture, it would display all of this on the screen, which is a bit stupid. Okay, because actually all we want is this text saying Fragger. Alright, now what we want to do is pick up where that graphic is. Now it's not easy, alright, because if I select it I get this blue square, and if I look at my values down here, the blue square is off the texture, which will go funny when we try and draw it. Okay, So what we're going to do is we're going to use the polygon tools, and we're going to change it. I held the left mouse button down there, and I'm going to change to the rectangle tool, and I'm going to draw a rectangle over my text. Okay, roughly even. Now, it doesn't matter that I've got a weird colour on there, because I'm going to move down here and I'm going to change the transparency, and I'm just doing this to try and work out where the graphic is on screen. Okay, now down here is the information I need, and you'll get more use of this as you do more of these, but this is the X and Y, the top left hand corner of this rectangle. So 0, 0 is where I want it to be. Okay, now this graphic roughly is 500 pixels wide and about 119 pixels high. I'm going to make that 120. Okay, I'm going to use that information when I've defined my frame. So it's 0, 0, so I'm going to go back to my game. I'm going to say, where I said new rectangle, it wants to know the X position, the Y, so that's top left hand corner, then it wants the width and the height, and you can see that the little box is telling me it wants width next. So my width, flicking back to fireworks, was 500, and my height was 120, which I can somehow remember. Okay, right, so that defines the graphic. Don't save fireworks with this new rectangle on top. Okay, I'm just going to move that out of my way. I've got the information I need. Okay, and we'll come back to this when we do the tiles and the graphic for the tanks and things, but that'll be a bit later on in the video. Okay, so I don't need to save that, I just needed it to look up the information. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I want to display this sprite at the top of the screen. Okay, now when we're talking about graphics, we have to specify an X and a Y position. So the X position is a position along horizontally, 0 is the left hand edge, and Y is a position vertically. 0 is the top, and it gets bigger as you go down. Okay, now to make it easy, I'm going to align this sprite. So I'm going to say align equals. Now when I press equals, it should come up with a picker, and I can just press enter to get a line up, and then put dot, and I want top. And what that allows me to do is specify an X and Y position, and they represent the top middle of the sprite I'm going to display, and you'll see this. So the Y position, so s.y, I'm going to set to 0, so that we put the top of the graphic at the top of the screen. And then the X position, so s.x, I'm going to set to the screen center, so it centers it in the screen. That's what top alignment does. So if I say gm.screensize.center.x, so where is the center of the screen? So if I change the size of the screen, I will still get the center with that code. Okay. I'm also going to specify a layer for this. So I'm going to say s.layer, and I'm going to say render layer. Use the picker. HUD. Okay, head up display. So that is drawn after everything. Okay, and that should be all we need to do to create a title graphic. So let's just review what we did. We typed the name of a subroutine we wanted that didn't exist. We got Visual Studio to create it by going right click and then create method, and it created it for us. We filled in the details to create a sprite. So we create a sprite with this line. We specify a graphic for it, so a texture and a rectangle part of that texture. Set its position using these 3 lines of code, and specify when to draw it. So this is drawn last. Okay, if we run our system, hopefully it should work, and we'll get that graphic displayed in the center of the screen. There you go, it says Fragger, your first sprite. Okay, not mega, The screen colour is purple, so let's change that as well. So after we've displayed the title graphic in our start title, the names we use are important. We're going to say to the engine manager, so gm.engineManager, screen colour equals, and I'm going to put colour dot, let's have, well, we'll have a green colour. What should we go for? Dark sea green. I don't even know what colour that is, so let's just try it. Dark sea green. Let's run that and see what colour that ends up as. It might be a bit funny. I don't know. Don't know what colour that is. Oh, that's all right. That'll do me. Okay, my graphic still stands out on it. Okay. So that's our first part of our code. Didn't do a lot because I've explained quite a bit in there. But in the next part, we're going to move on and we're going to create our tile map, as I call it, which basically just specifies blocks in a grid where they go on screen. Okay.